So I'll also take a screen sharing now.
Yep,
so thank you for introducing the sponsors, because I was afraid that I was going to completely botch the sponsor names. So about myself, as Björn mentioned, I'm a data platform MVP since March 2020. I'm a senior data insights consultant, which just is a fancy word for I do stuff with data to help customers. So in any spare time that I sometimes do have, I'm also engaged with a user group in Belgium called Data Minds. We do similar things like Past Deutschland does. We just do it in Belgium. That being said, my social details, my handles are also on this slide. If you want to reach out, if you want to ask me questions, feel free and just hit me up. For a brief moment, I was thinking about doing the session in German until I read that it's an international session. And the second thing is that my German is about the same quality as a notorious Bayern Munich player from the 80s, I think. So Germany Pfaff is pretty much known in Belgium for a lot of things. Let's just say that his German knowledge is not one of those things. Hence English today for the time being. If you have any questions, Björn and I agreed, you can ask him in the chat. He will ask them to me, and we'll try to handle them as we go. So I've got a lot of things that I wanted to put in here. It is the first time that I'm doing this session in a public setting. So I've got no clue where I'll eventually land. But that being said, what do I want you to take home with you, or take with you from this call? Is I want to let you know what Power BI Premium effectively is, and a few sets of things that you can do to improve. But hopefully convince you as well that auditing is key. Knowing what is happening is the most important thing of all. And it's Friday, so sit back, grab yourself a coffee if you haven't done so already, and relax. That's the most important thing as well. But I do want to warn you, this is not a roadmap session on Premium Gen 2 or the Premium per user licensing. For the simple reason is that I do not know more than any of you does. And let's say that if I did know more about it, I couldn't be able to tell anything about it anyway, because it's not public knowledge right now. But what is Power BI Premium? Power BI Premium, in comparison to Power BI Pro or shared capacity, is dedicated capacity, meaning you get a set of hardware that is dedicated only to your organization. And the set of hardware, the resources you get, can vary from a 8 vCores, virtual cores, and 25 gigabytes of RAM to 128 vCores and 400 gigabytes of RAM. So the price always also depends highly on this as well, because the P1 to the P5 scales linearly based on the resources, but it also scales linearly on the pricing amount. So a P1 starts at 4,200 euros, and then P2 goes to 8,400, and you end up at something like 65,000 euros for a P5. If you want to pay more, you can probably get more resources allocated to you as well. It's probably just a matter of contacting Microsoft and saying, hey, I want more resources. The thing is as well is, you also get a richer feature set, because there are certain features in Power BI that only release to Premium first, or they might not even go to Power BI Pro as well, some things. These are economical reasons. A lot of the discussions have been held about those as well. Economical reasons, but also the fact that it is also the discussion on enterprise versus small businesses and single users. So I, for one, am mostly okay with the decisions they've been making throughout the past years. But it also allows you to make sure that your data can be split up by multiple regions. So it allows for multi-geo support. But most importantly, it is also a way to not have to give every single user that needs to access your Power BI content to have a Power BI Pro subscription, because it does allow you to have those consumers, those read-only users, to completely negate those subscriptions. This is not, I repeat, this is not easy mode for performance. Shared capacity has limitations, but it is completely managed by Microsoft for us. The thing is that you get your dedicated set of resources, but you have to keep an eye on this. You have to make sure that you manage these things for yourself as well, like any other piece of hardware or tool that you have. If you're not checking it, if you're not auditing it, if you're not taking actions on these audits, you're probably going to have a very bad time when a few months have come to pass. So before I do go on, there are some very big things coming up, because Power BI at Ignite received the massive announcement that Power BI Premium Generation 2 was going to come somewhere, I'm assuming quarter 2 of the calendar year 2021. And it's going to mean big things, because it's also going to mean that the admin experience for Power BI Premium is going to be drastically improved, because right now it's a bit of knowing what to do and writing your own scripts for a lot of things and making sure that you can get data to actually make those informed decisions. That's going to be drastically improved. Hopefully, probably, we'll see. The thing is as well is that they also announced this thing called Power BI Premium per user. That means that they have a single license where you get a set of premium features. That's going to mean, I'm going to dive into a similar approach later on as well, is that we can offload things from our production capacity to those kind of licenses. So it's probably going to give us a lot of interesting things, but it also means that we don't have to spend those 4,000 euros each month or whatever you need to pay to get those premium features, because we can get that at a more discounted rate. How much is going to cost? We don't know. We keep being assured that it's going to be a reasonably priced license amount, but we'll have to see. I think preview is coming out somewhere in a month and a half. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. But it all starts with, you have a piece of capacity. What do you do with it? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to check those default capacity settings, because you have different workloads, types of workloads that can run on your capacity. But by default, they're set to amounts that don't always add up to what your workload is for your organization. Because by default, for instance, the different types of workloads can collectively take up about 140 or 150% of the resources you have. Is this a bad thing? No, because that means that they can dynamically scale. But let's just say that if you're in the situation where all those workloads are actively used, they'll end up fighting about resources, and there's a high chance that your user will see performance degradation on their services they're using. So it is very much something that I recommend to you to check those default capacity workload settings and change them for what the types of workloads are that you have in your organization or going to get in the future. If you have multiple premium capacities, for instance, you can decide this capacity can do only data sets, and this capacity is the AI and data flows capacity, or for instance. It's those things that you need to think about. So how do we do this? Before I go into the portal, I have to say that I cannot show everything from exactly in the portal, because I personally do not have a test capacity at my disposal, and I can also not show production data for everything. So there are some things that I can show and some things that I need to show you with anonymized screenshots. But if we're looking at the capacity settings, this is me right now being inside of the Power BI portal. That means that we can go here, and if we've gone over and then said, I want to look at my admin portal. Yep, so Zoom, it still doesn't work correctly. Then we can go to our capacity settings, we select the capacity, and then we end up in this kind of screen. And this is where we can start deciding on the things that we need to do. So by default, all these workloads are turned on. So all these workloads, they can assume some pieces of the memory allocation. So step one that you need to do, according to me, is make sure that they are set correctly to the workload that you have. And then depending on the workloads that you have, if you're using data flows or if you're using data sets, it might make sense to start tuning a bit more in detail those settings. Do you need to do that right off the bat? No, probably not. It's probably best to keep them at default and then change when you're seeing issues or if you know that a certain change is coming. But that's setting up these capacity settings, which isn't that hard at all. So we can also set up who's managing the capacity and who can assign workloads to this capacity, which is okay. But there is this thing as well called advanced options. And the only thing that's in here is a capacity restart. Please let me stress this very, very carefully. Do not do this unless your capacity is totally frozen. Because if you restart the capacity, it's like performing your SQL Server in the middle of the working day and just completely dropping everything that it has. So it will take time to start up as a one thing, but it also will take time to load up that data into the memory as well. So I, for one, have not seen an actual need for this button in the, 2.5 years that I'm working with Premium. So don't use this lightly. It is to be used as an exception, please. Yeah, so I always keep forgetting to skip to this kind of slide, but the main thing as well is that we have this thing called the Premium Capacity Metrics app, which is a mouthful, I know, but this is the app that gives us, it's the bread and butter of what we need to do. It is our base of operations. It gives us the different kinds of metrics we can use for different types of workloads. It allows you to slice and dice across workspaces, data sets to get a bit of more of an in-depth view of what it is. The thing is, it only collects 7 days worth of data. So the running past 7 days. Older data is just thrown away. So what I've done as well is since the release of the Power BI Premium Capacity Metrics app v2, which has been released as a template app, that means that it is a data set underneath and it is stored in a workspace. So what I've done is I've promoted that workspace to Premium Capacity, and I'm connecting to the data set using the XMLA endpoint. I'm extracting the data and storing it inside of a SQL server, and I'm building up history, which means that I can correlate my data for a longer period than about 7 days. And every time I start up a new assignment at a customer, right now, it is the first thing I do to make sure that that data is captured and that we can use it. How do you do this? Well, it's any tool that you might have in your set of range that can connect using the XMLA endpoint and speak DAX/MDX can do this. Data flows is one thing, SSIS can do the same thing as well. So I can't go into full details on this, but the thing is as well is when we're looking at this workspace, is by default it is not added into Premium. So that's the first thing I did. I made sure that the workspace was assigned to Premium, and then that means that inside of the workspace, I think they took away my permissions. So inside of the workspace, let me connect to the different one because I know that this one is inside of the workspace. There is this thing called, so it took away my permissions. But in any case, there is an XMLA connection string that you can use here. You can copy that connection string and then use your tool of choice to actually go ahead and connect to that data. So that's how simple it is. It is some fiddling about with how the data is structured, and it's not always as logically modeled, but it does allow you to do some pretty cool things. And it also does allow you to go further than the standard visualizations, because it is not always super clear what's shown in there. The first version of the app had some really confusing things in there. There still are, but they've improved upon that. So it is mainly a report and a dashboard as well that shows you a bunch of data. So the most important things that are in there is data sets and how the refreshes are handling. So how the refreshes are handling pretty much means that is how long are they taking, what's the maximum duration of that, and how long are they waiting. And it's that waiting time that interests me most of the time as well, along with the duration. And I'll keep diving into that a bit as well in a bit. Because this is the kind of statistics and metrics that allow me to see when are active times on my capacity happening, when is a lot of things going on. Same thing as well as with those refreshes is that you can see how many of those are scheduled and what are effectively my peak times. So the peak times you're seeing here in this graph is about at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the night, which is typically when a lot of people start scheduling their things. So one of those things that you need to look into as well is how are your scheduled refreshes set up in the organization, meaning is everyone going to refresh at the same time? Because if that possibly happens, you will likely see a lot of these wait times occurring. And if things are waiting, that means that they cannot be processed. So that's important to keep in mind. What is also important is to know that a data set takes 2 times as much as memory as the data set is in effect. Because of the fact it needs to keep a copy alive, it needs to make a new copy, and it is also taking RAM to do processing. So if there's no resources available, they will be queued up. And that's the wait times you're seeing. How many refreshes can occur at the same time? Well, it is 1.5 times of the amount of back-end vCores you have. So for AP1 SKU, the entry model, you have 6 concurrent refreshes that can be done. If there's more than those 6 happening at the same time, they'll be queued and they'll have to wait. If there's no memory available, they'll try to create some memory. If there's no memory to be created, then they'll have to wait as well. On-demand refreshes, they're a bit different. They'll retry, and if it doesn't work, then they'll just fail and say that there's no resources available. So the one that I usually spend the most of my time in is the data sets ones, because this gives me this gives me some point of view on how large are my data sets, and what is most importantly in this one is how are my evictions going, because evictions is it's a nasty little term, because everyone thinks that evictions are a horrible thing that doesn't need to happen on your capacity. Well, I'm here to tell you that evictions are a completely normal process inside of your premium capacity, and you only should be worried is if you're seeing extremely high spikes. Meaning that if you have about, like in the instance that we have here, there's about 50 models loaded into my capacity here, and I'm seeing about 30 different evictions happening. Is this a high number? Yes, but I also know from experience that this is at the time that a lot of data sets are refreshing. So a lot of memory is consumed for this. So if it's during refresh time and you're not seeing a lot of waits, you don't need to worry about this. If you're seeing a high number of evictions throughout the day, during the working hours of your people, then it might be worth a shot to actually go looking into this. How you go into looking into this is pretty much trying to determine who's taking up a lot of resources and then go have a chat with those people what it is. So the process of an eviction is if there's not enough memory available, then the capacity will try to throw one out. We'll try to throw out another model. The logic is used is pretty much black box. We don't know which one effectively is going to be picked. It's going to try to make room inside of the memory, and that is called an eviction. If there's no models to be thrown out, that's when we'll see those out of memory errors that we can sometimes see. So the thing is that Power BI will try to detect models that have not been used, and then it's going to try to kick those out. Which one he picks first and which one it doesn't, like I said, is black box. So that's pretty much what it's trying to do. Yeah, that was just the CEO of the company walking by, so I had to wave and say hi. This is pretty much what these evictions are about. So I do want to stress that evictions are normal. Don't stress about them unless you're seeing high numbers throughout the day, and unless you're seeing actually that your users are starting complaining, because an eviction is data gets loaded out of memory and another data set needs to be loaded inside of a model, and the loading of the data inside of the model takes a bit of time. So how long it is depends on the model and depends on the size of the data, but it takes a bit of time. So unless your users are complaining about it, don't stress about it too much. So the query durations is pretty much, well, how long is it taking to render a query, to get the data out of there? How long is it taking to have a request from a user to get data, to have the data returned to the report or the dashboard it's using? How long is this taking? And this is the graph that is so confusing, because it has a lot of different options on there. And it has a lot of different options that need to be shown inside of this graph as well. So it's a combo chart. So they have a line chart in there of memory consumption, and they have a distribution in there. The thing is, if you're seeing those durations if you're seeing the distribution shift towards more than 300 milliseconds, then you might want to go ahead and go looking into more detail of how much memory is being used and what users are doing this. It's a rule of thumb that I try to handle, but it also depends on the capacity you're running and what the usage is inside your organization. So the same thing with wait times is when there's no resources available or when all the concurrent processes are in use, you'll see wait times. If you're seeing high wait times, it might be worth a shot to actually go looking into what's causing these waits. Are we having too much concurrent things at the same time? And go troubleshooting these things. So for the time being, the capacity metrics app is the base of operations. This is what we need. This is what we have. We can extract that data as well, but there is it is only loaded once per day at the timestamp that you set up. You can manipulate the scheduled refresh, but you'll always have delayed data. So it's not real-time monitoring of your capacity. That real-time monitoring, well, near real-time monitoring, it's supposedly coming through an integration with Azure Monitor and Log Analytics, but we'll see that when it gets here. I cannot dive into that because I really don't know at this point. So the XML access pretty much failed, so that's my fault, and I apologize for that. But as I mentioned in the beginning, you need to know what's happening on your capacity. Who's accessing reports? Who's setting up scheduled refreshes? Who's effectively doing something? Are users that have a pro subscription actually doing something with their pro subscription? Are they actually using Power BI? It's those kind of questions that you need to keep in mind, because if we're looking at, for instance, SQL Server and DBAs, they also need to monitor what's happening on their server. They need to be able to respond to things happening. They need to be able to check if the actions need to be taken. So it's the same thing for Power BI. It needs to be monitored, it needs to be audited, and you need to take actions on let's say, suspicious actions or actions that require your attention. It's the same thing. So how do you do this? Well, this is a slide that I took from Melissa Coates, who's pretty much the reference on anything for Power BI governance. And she actually made up a quite complete overview of what you can monitor for Power BI. I'm not saying that you should monitor all of these different things, but if you can, definitely do, because it is really interesting to do so. So the most important one is the audit log. Get those audit logs either through Office 365 or the Power BI activity log. Get those out so you can see who's doing what, what's happening on there, and who's doing actions that we need to take some actions on. The thing as well is get out those information about the artifacts, workspaces, reports, data sets, data sources, those kind of things. So you're able to correlate those activity log details to what's effectively inside of your capacity. Same thing with security as well, is that I had a huge discussion about this the other day, is that you also need to be who can actually access possible sensitive data, which is pretty important if you're talking about compliance and those kind of things. So get those security details out as well. So other than that, you can get out all the different data about users, about licenses, about which groups they're in, and then the gateways as well. Do you need to monitor all of these things? No, you need to check for yourself what's important for me and what do I actually need to use to be able to keep going. So typically, I for one also use the PowerShell scripts. And the PowerShell scripts either output JSON or CSV files, and then you can, if you have auditors and admins, they can use those directly. But you typically go ahead and land those inside of a database or a data lake storage to be able to work with that as well. So auditing, knowing who's doing what, is key. Let me reiterate that ad infinitum, to be honest, because it is often overlooked and can really help save your butt. In the end, it is also all about the money, period. Because like I mentioned, that not every user accessing your capacity needs those licenses. Because if they are doing read-only access, if they're just viewing reports, if they are a viewer role inside of an app workspace, or if they are consuming their data through an app, they don't need to have a Power BI Pro subscription. That means that you can probably drastically reduce the costs you have on your Power BI Pro licenses. And debating the cost of Power BI Premium versus Power BI Pro is always tricky, but in the end, it boils down to how many content creators do you have, how many people are creating content, need to collaborate in workspaces, those kind of things, because they'll always need a Power BI Pro, and how many consumers do you have? And then it's a matter of weighing off the consumers you have towards the Power BI Premium price and to check if it's economically viable for you. Because the tipping point is depending on what price you get, is at around 350, 450 users, consumers, to make economically sense. Unless you're saying, no, we need those premium features, then it's a different business case and a different story. How premium per user will change the story, we'll have to see. I, for one, am really excited about premium per user because it's going to do some pretty cool things as well for us. But as well is most organizations that I see, they typically have one premium capacity, which means that if they're doing dev and test environments as well, they end up on the same capacity and they interfere with each other. And well, it is not always ideal. So what you can also do is you can use Power BI Embedded, the A SKUs, to actually spin up those SKUs because they actually have close to feature parity. For instance, if you want to do the deployment pipelines, you can spin up an AASKU Power BI embedded workspace and host your development and acceptance workspaces on there. And if you're done with it, if they're deployed and if you've checked them, you can deactivate that. The difference is they're billed by the minute or the hour. I keep forgetting what it exactly is, but it is not a monthly commitment like Power BI Premiums. So you can potentially test and validate those things and then just turn them off, rather than having to spend 3 physical copies of your data inside of a production capacity and possibly overcommitting the entire thing. So look into those things if you have those deployment pipelines, or if you need to use paginated reports or an export to file API, because it can potentially save you a lot of money and effort as well. Because if you have to upgrade your P1 to P2, then you're talking double the money. But if you spin up a few ASKUs, you can possibly get it done with 200 euros a month, and that's 4,000 euros saved each month. So it is thinking about those things that will really help you make those economically viable decisions. So those features as well is, I've probably missed a few as well, but the most important ones that are inside of Premium and are currently not inside of Pro is paginated reports, reporting services inside of Power BI, some AI features like cognitive services, semantic text analysis, those kind of things. The Dataflow's enhanced compute engine, that's where Dataflow's really shines. XMLA read-write, which is pretty much, if you're used to doing cool stuff in analysis services on premises, then you can start doing most of these things towards your Power BI datasets inside of Premium capacity as well. For instance, a very advanced version of CI/CD, doing translations, all those different types of things. They all happen through the XMLA read-write point. Deployment pipelines as well. And there is also this thing called large model support. And I am going to dive into this very briefly as well, because it allows you theoretically to have up to 4 terabytes in a dataset size, in a single dataset inside of Power BI. If you need to put 4 terabytes of a model size, that's going to be quite a large dataset size. But that support, that's something that Chris Wade told us in the Power BI quiz on Wednesday, is that even for models that are 1 gigabytes or larger, they also have a performance gain if you put those on workspaces located inside of that large model support. The reason is because it switches from a analysis services backup format, a .abf format, to premium files. So I was quite interested in that thing that he was saying, and I tested it on a few models, and it actually is. I saw a performance gain of about 20% on the refresh times for those models larger than 1 gigabyte. So it is definitely worth looking into these things. So to conclude, because I had to blast through this really quickly, is Premium Generation 2 and Premium Productions will be huge, period. It'll mean a drastic shift in how we're doing things right now in Premium. And I'm very interested to see what this is going to be, because possibly if people ask me to do the session again in 6 months, I'll probably have to redo most of this anyway. So check and adjust the capacity workload settings, because the default ones are not always correct for your workload. Right now, the capacity metrics app v2 is your base of operations, but do export that data to persistent storage to be able to concatenate, to be able to correlate that data across longer periods of time. Evictions are perfectly normal, so don't worry about it unless you're seeing high numbers of evictions throughout the day or users are complaining about it. Auditing is key. Like I said, I'll keep reiterating that. Make sure that you have a complete overview of what's happening so you can take informed decisions on this. And if you want to, try to check out what the large model support can mean for your models larger than 1 gigabyte, because I did see a performance gain on those files. And if you have non-critical workloads like acceptance and production workspaces or paginated reports that need to run once every month, you can maybe offload those to ASKUs to reduce the stress that you have in your capacity and possibly also your costs, your total costs. So there is a bunch of resources in there that I used that I generally check as a lot of the times as well. And with that said, I blasted through at an incredible pace. Thank you to the sponsors, because it is important for community organizers to have these kinds of sponsors, even for a virtual event. With that said, these are my contact details. I'll share the link to my slides on GitHub as well, again, in the chat. So I went 1 minute overboard, which is, I apologize. But if there's questions, feel free to ask them now.